Welcome to this Tuesday, 41 days left in the Texas legislative session. We are on April 22nd. I'm Michael Quinn Sullivan, publisher of Texas Scorecard, standing here as I do almost every Tuesday with Brandon Waltens.
Yep.
Nice to be with you. I was on a pretty good streak of missing every other
you missed
one.
Quite a few, yeah.
And
holding the bag, but that's all right.
Aw, poor guy. Okay, so Brandon, we are we've passed the 100-day mark of the 140-day constitutionally defined legislative session. We are over in the Texas Senate. Sound like a broken record. The Texas Senate has moved very aggressively throughout the session, passing, I think at this point, call it 7 out of 8 of the Republican priorities, maybe 8 out of 8.
Certainly addressing some of them in different ways. Yeah,
those priorities established by the delegates of the Republican convention. The Texas House continues to be a different story.
Yes, I mean, at this point, they've passed 0 of the 8 that were passed by delegates. That's certainly true. School choice obviously was the big fight last week, and I don't want to minimize that. But if you take school choice out of the equation at this point, there hasn't been a lot of substantive, I would say, bills. When we talk about, for example, property tax relief, which should be a layup, they've passed bills that have touched on property tax relief, but they've been in very small ways, right?
So last night, something fascinating happened. State Representative Brent Money, a freshman member from East Texas, announced that legislation that was supposed to be held on a hearing had now been pulled. Apparently, he was told by the chairman of the committee that it was the Speaker's office who wanted it pulled. The Speaker's office, no, it was the committee chairman who wanted it pulled. But all in the legislation, very important to pro-lifers, but now being taken off the hearing docket before the committee. Is this evil? Is this incompetence? Is it payback? Is it maybe a mixture of all three?
Who's to say? I mean, this was a case where the chairman of that committee, criminal jurisprudence, John Smithy, said, look, it was the Speaker's team made us pull it. By the way, the bill we're talking about here is the Abolish Abortion bill, which, different side, even within the pro-life community, people have different views on the bill itself. But one thing that's for certain is this is something that certainly does have a following. This is something that Representative Money has pushed pretty strongly for. This is something he's put a lot of his push into. And the fact that you have a bill scheduled, I mean, it was supposed to be heard today. People have come down to Austin, right? They've traveled. They want to testify on this bill. And for it, literally the 11th hour for it to be pulled, is something that's obviously frustrating to people who really care about that legislation.
Yeah, and I think having watched the legislative process off and on for 30 years, there's certainly no shortage of opportunities, no shortage of times in which the House committee has held a hearing, and that's the last you hear of the bill. Okay, we're going to let people bring their dogs and ponies in. We're going to walk them in front of the committee chair, and we're going to have a long meeting, and we will never talk about this again. And that's been a very popular way to kill both legislation on the left, legislation on the right. Appease a couple of people and let it be done. The fact that the hearing was canceled is a little different.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember another time. I mean, obviously this happens occasionally, but it's hard to think of a recent time where something this high profile was withdrawn from a committee. We haven't seen that.
So one of the other issues that has definitely been on the minds of a lot of people, and you've seen it reflected in conversations around public education, has been that issue of the accountability for abuse in public schools. One guy who's been leading the charge in that in the Texas House is State Representative Mitch Little from Louisville, Texas. Mr. Little, thanks for joining us this morning.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So you're driving legislation that would make it give greater accountability, probably what I would say, greater accountability when children are harmed in schools. Why is that important to you?
Yeah, the thing that my bill seeks to do is to put some accountability back into our school system. When you have kids who are being sexually abused by teachers, administrators, coaches in the school system, oftentimes they have no remedy.
Right.
So because of the sovereign immunity that applies to the school district and generally its employees, they don't have a way for people to gain access to the court system to have review over that situation. And the school districts are not very happy about the idea of being subjected to liability for this type of abuse. I think you posted yesterday. I mean, this is an evergreen situation in the state of Texas. Literally every day, Michael, you could post a different article about sex abuse stuff that's going on in Texas public schools, and it's never accounted for.
Yeah, and I think for me, as I've been watching this literally unravel. With all of these stories coming out of the past couple of years, that the fact that we don't have a mechanism for accountability. I hear this a lot from teachers who say, "Oh, we knew this was going on, but we couldn't say anything. I worried for our own job or anything." And the lack of accountability. Then, in fact, a culture that kind of closes ranks when it should be a culture that's protecting children. Very frustrating.
Well, Michael, the thing that is shocking to me is our entire governmental system is built on checks and balances. We have the legislature to balance the executive. We have the judiciary to balance them out both together. So the thing that is a dead end for Texas parents with kids in the public school system is if I drop my kid off and they're sexually abused by a teacher, by an administrator, by a coach, where do I go? And I can't go to the judiciary to put that system in check. Well, my bill is going to allow them to do that. I think this is an important step forward in the state of Texas for solving that problem.
So let me, this is your first session, but somebody who's been here for a few sessions now is Representative Steve Toth, who put out some numbers yesterday, which really put, I think, the speed of the session in context. You're looking back just 3 sessions. At this point, on this day of the session, there were 280 bills passed in the House. At this point now, this session, there have been only 51 bills passed. What do you make of this?
This is not, so the lack of bills being moved is not the disease. It is a symptom of the disease. The disease that occupies the Texas House is the Faustian bargain between the Republicans and the Democrats that ensures that Democrat bills will advance and no meaningful GOP priorities are going to. You see the Senate cranking out GOP priorities day after day after day. Why doesn't it happen in the House, Brandon? Many of those priorities haven't even gotten hearing in the Texas House. So what is this emblematic of? It's the power structure in the House is driven by what the Democrats will tolerate. That's the limiting factor on the legislation that's coming forward in the Texas House.
And we saw some of this during the budget where you were pretty outspoken about some of the deals that were happening behind the scenes with Democrats. What was the most frustrating part of that budget debate?
The cooperation between GOP Republican leadership in the House and the Democrats to silence conservative amendments to the budget. You were talking a few minutes ago about Brent's bill being killed. The swamp ate Brent's bill, okay? So in other words, we're not getting a hearing today because House Republican leadership has decided that equal protection for the lives of the unborn is not a meritorious thing for us to discuss in committee.
Wow.
Okay? So what is the Texas House is marked by the things that it is not willing to discuss. They are not willing to hear changes to the rules. They are not willing to hear changes to the budget. They are not willing to hear equal protection for the unborn. So it's really a culture of silencing conservatives that exists, and if you don't like the way it is, you got to change the people who are in charge.
Speaking of people in charge, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We find ourselves in the curious place. I had kind of started to think constitutionally Ken Paxton was required to be our Attorney General, but apparently Mr. Paxton wants to do something else, right? As we look at the AG's race, and I'm asking this because you represented the Attorney General, you're a successful practicing attorney. What kind of questions right now should voters and look? We're 11 months out from the election, legislative session going on. But right now, what kind of questions should we as voters, we as taxpayers, be asking of ourselves and of potential candidates, people who maybe we want to recruit to run, or people who've stepped up and said they're going to run? What kind of questions should we be asking?
Because voters of Texas need to be asking the question, who's the best lawyer we can hire? Yeah. And I tell Ken Paxton all the time, I mean, he's a very politically astute person. He was in this building for a long time, both as a rep and a senator, but his superpower is his aggression. I think that's the thing that Texas voters and certainly our grassroots of the Republican Party value most, is when everybody else is thinking about it, Ken Paxton is doing it. You need someone who's not only a great legal mind, but you need someone who is aggressive to get after the problem. And that's what Ken does, is he's when everybody else is thinking about it, he's already done it.
Right. Excellent.
One last question. Jill Glover was somebody you knew, and a lot of grassroots activists and people who are watching knew. And of course, we saw last week where they tried to lump in a resolution honoring Cecile Richards with a resolution honoring Jill Glover. They could not be farther apart, right? Ultimately, that effort was killed. I mean, was that itself, I mean, sort of a tribute to Jill herself?
There's absolutely, so you may have seen Briscoe Kane holding up that sign for Jill. The House Sergeant came and grabbed it. I wrote that sign, and Briscoe held it up. For me, when I was deciding to run Brandon, Jill was one of the first people I met, and very sick at the time. Right. You don't have to spend much time with her to have known that the first thing would have wanted us to do was take down the entire calendar. And that's exactly what we did, praise God. So no one in the Texas House, no one in Texas should have to violate their conscience by voting for junk that never should have been there in the first place.
Outstanding.
Truly.
Well, Mitch Little, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely. We appreciate you stepping in with us.
God bless you guys.
And thank you for joining us in this edition of The Advance.